Welcome to today's video where I'm going to show you how to solve 10 cases in 5 seconds with a proper case manager and the efficient use of macros. What essentially I've done is build a macro to take out any circularity in the model. So you want to figure out where your circularity is. Now I've built the FinRec to go in and have one point of circularity, and that's really important to have a single point. So essentially we have our finance costs during construction, our transaction fees, and this is all summed up, and this creates an active row. And I've created a static row that everything is driven off of the static row. And what I mean by that is the available equity commitment is driven off of this row, and what we can draw on is based on the available equity commitment. Same thing with available debt commitment. So our gearing sizing is based off of this static number. And what that enables us to do is basically put whatever we want in the sum line, and our macro will take out any circularity. Firstly, how do we find circularity? So I'm going to put some circularity back in the system. I'm going to link where the line is circular. Your first step in finding circularity is turning iterations off. You're going to go to your formulas and then into error checking up on this screen here and down to circular references, and you'll see each of these lines are actually circular because they now all reference this. But what you want to do is find where the circularity actually arises. And this list and drop down isn't going to tell you that. What I used to do when I didn't know exactly where it is I'm just simply going to take this formula and preserve it by putting it in this row. And I'm just going to hard code everything in this line. And all of a sudden I have zero circularity, no circular references. And that's what we're looking for. But that's obviously not a solution. That's not a dynamic model. So we're going to put it in. And now what we've done is through the macro hard coded this line. And that's what you're trying to find when you're fixing circularity. It's the single point fixes all circularity. And if your models are done in a proper structure, really only have 1 or 2 points of circularity throughout your model, maybe at max 4 or 5, and you'll have a macro to paste each of those down. So that's what today's video is going to be, is showing you how to fix the circularity. So we're going to start by bringing this down so we don't have a circular model to work with. And before we do anything, we need to make sure we have our calculations options on automatic. Otherwise, our macros are not going to work. In the previous video, we had FinRec active or just total financing requirements. We're now going to create the active line, which is simply the formula, and we're going to create a static line. Now, the static line is going to link into our macro tab. So the first thing we're going to do is create a copy line and a paste line. Our copy line links to the active number. This is where it's circular. Our paste line is going to be an index match below. That enables us to run multiple cases of circularity. So we'll run the macro, and you'll see it takes 5 seconds. And now I can go in and change cases, and I don't have to rerun the macro. It just picks up what the next case is. So this is helpful if you have a whole bunch of scenarios and you want to be able to flip in between the scenarios or show multiple scenarios and ensure there's no circularity and they're fully solved for. Now we're going to get into VBA. So the first thing you want to do is go into customize ribbon and make sure you have developer selected. Once you do that, you're going to go developer, Visual Basic. Now we have our different macros. Essentially what we've done here is the FinRec macro. So jumping back, what I've done is I've named ranges, and naming ranges is critical for macros as you want to preserve the actual area. And if I were to just label row 14 and then I inserted a row, my macro is now going to break. So what you do is you select the area you want to copy, Alt F3, and name your macro. And I do a very simple naming convention. I do what the macro is, underscore whether it's a copy or paste. So here's my line, copying the entire range, FinRec copy, and this is going to be FinRec paste. So Alt F3 to change a name and Control F3 to jump into your name manager. And if you're enabled to access your name manager, you have a massively busted model. And I would either copy all those sheets into a new Excel book, and that may be very cumbersome, or simply start again. So in order to run an infrastructure model, you need to be able to know what the name manager is and be able to change names. Without it, you're basically screwed. And your names should be very simple. So there shouldn't be like 150 items here. That's going to be some sort of model that's been passed over proper and updated. You want something very clean. So you can see my named manager is very clean. There's no external links. So in order to set up our macro, we're going to need a couple things. We're going to need our FinRack delta, which is essentially a formula that's going to go in and show us, have we solved this to our level of tolerance? Every new macro for copy and pasting is going to have a copy named range, paste named range, and a delta named range. Now I name my delta name range the same FinRack underscore delta. And the last thing I've set up here is a tolerance named range. Tolerance is basically how granular you want your solution to be. So I usually do this to 10 to the negative 6 or 10 to the negative 8 to go in and basically say to the penny, 10 to the negative 8, we have a model in the millions and we move 2 decimal places to the left. So by introducing more granularity, it's going to take the model longer as it has to copy and paste more and more to get closer to that variable. But when you're finalizing a model, you want that level of granularity. You're going to put together an amortization schedule that goes into your credit agreement that needs to be correct to the penny. And that's super essential. So the way you ensure that is by increasing your tolerance sufficiently. So now that we have our tolerance, we can simply go in and know what we're solving for, the level of granularity. We have our FinRack copy, our FinRack paste. The last thing we name is our scenario. And our scenario is what drives our scenario manager. So very simple macro that we're going to write. And that's basically going to paste this line down to the appropriate line here. And this is going to index match based on our scenario. So now we'll go into our VBA. And the first thing we're going to do is write sub FinRack. Then we're going to jump into the do until. And do until basically says keep looping this. And once you do until, you need a loop. So do until says keep doing something until range. So every named range needs to be first listed as range, and then in parentheses and quotes, the defined name. And then you have to tell it what kind of solving feature you're looking for. So this is dot value. So I want to solve for this number to be 0. And you'll see without the conditional formatting, it's 0. Next thing you're going to do is exactly what I've described here. Offsets from the paste range by the scenario number and inserts the copied values. So this apostrophe here just goes and explains to the auditor or the user what this is doing. Pretty essential you have these in place so people know what's going on in your VBA. Your VBA should be max a couple of lines. It shouldn't be super complicated. Then we're going to set up the actual copy paste. So we're going to start with our paste. We're going to basically say make FinRack paste offset by our scenario. So in case 1, it'll be 1. Case 2 will be 2. Make that value equal to the copy value. So essentially all it's doing is saying make this. And if I were to do this manually, all it's saying is make this line equal to this line until this tolerance is sufficient. And you'll see my first paste, it's going to take a number of pastes until it's at its level of tolerance. But the beauty of this is I can't do that faster than the macro can. And then we're going to end it with a loop. So you'll see once we drop down to case 2 and we're going to hit the solve button, and you'll see very quickly that the macro populates it and stops running. So now we have buttons. So buttons are essentially clickable objects that can go and run our macro for us. So you can create any shape. So I can call this the solve button. And once you create a shape, you're just going to right click on it and hit assign macro. And I have my solve 1 and solve all. Solve 1 is going to call all my circular macros. So let's jump into the VBA. All that solve 1 does is do until the master delta equals 0. So very similar logic to the FinRack. And then it's going to call all my copy paste macros, which I only have 1, and then it'll loop until it does that. And basically what this enables is this is now my master delta. So it goes and looks at every single macro I'll have, because very often I'll have, 3 to 5 macros in a model. And it goes and says, run the sequencing in the order that I've listed the macros until this number is 0. So it's a way to run multiple macros and multiple copy paste in a single button. So I'm going to assign the macro here, solve 1, hit OK. I'm going to switch to a case that isn't solved. You can see there's 2 red lights, and I'm going to hit the solve button, and that's all there is to it. Now my solve all button is basically just going to flip in between cases. Go in and increment on my scenario scenario. So I'm going to flip in between the scenarios, and I'm going to call the solve1 macro each time. And once it's solved, I will increase the value of the range up until the active scenarios. And active scenarios is just going and telling the macro, how many times do I go and run this? So I have a defined range named active scenarios, and I go in and just use a simple count A function that I've inserted this new case. I want to run all my new sensitivities, and I can change things like the level of transaction fees, as that's what's going to be most sensitive, but I can also change my commitment fees, and we can go 50, 51, 62, and I can change, maybe I'll change my land costs. So 750, 1,000, and this is just going to quickly let me do basically as much analysis as I need to. So the nightmare of every analyst or associate infrastructure banking is the sponsor who asks for 1,000 cases. This solve all basically goes in and resolves that. And this macro just goes and says, no problem, we'll go solve all those scenarios for you in 10 seconds. And that's macros. Now let's jump into the way I like to set up my case manager. So the first thing you're going to do is have a data validation section and put your cases in a column essentially. And the reason you're going to do that is you're going to go into developer, you're going to hit insert and then combo box from control. And this is going to create a drop-down list. So you're going to configure this by hitting format control. Your input range is going to be your data validation. You want to make sure you have sufficient rows. And then your cell link is just going to be your scenario. And so now you have this drop-down that can basically change the case from any cell. Now, the trick to this is, the way I set it up is you actually need to flip sheets if you want to use this on multiple sheets. So you go to one sheet and then you just go select your ranges again. But what you'll see is now it shows input. So if I move this over like I have on a bunch of sheets, it's going to reference the right sheet. So same thing with cell link. We're going to flip sheets. So grab the actual link, and that's all there is to it. That's case switching. Other than the case switching, there's another thing you want to set up, and that's your active case. And the way to do this, and I'm pretty adamant that there's really only one way, is blank index. So what is blank index does is it goes and says, if there's not a value populated in the cell, take the first column. So if I go to sensitivity 3, it's really cumbersome to have to populate January 1, 2021 across the rows. And it's really hard to see what's changed in between the cases. There's no reason to populate an input more than once. And it's going to create some potential human error if you accidentally go January 1, 2020 in sensitivity 3. So it's really just your control case and all your variables. You accomplish this by having a formula called isBlank. So it's a simple formula of if is blank your index, and your index is just your row, and your scenario is blank. So if that's true, it's going to go to the first cell. If it's not true, it's going to pick something else. So the second I populate this with something, and you'll see the second I change this to January 2023, it's going to pick up January 2023. So those are the two things I wanted to cover in today's video. If you like today's video, please like and subscribe, and I welcome any comments. I really enjoy hearing from you guys. If this is a little bit too complicated for you to set it up, I am happy to provide the model, as goes with all videos. Simply send me an email and I will provide the Excel file. All the best.